The corridors of the divine offices stretch beyond what the mind can bear. They glimmer with a light that is neither born nor reflected, as if the universe itself were trying to remember why it began. Through them drift the drones of cosmic paperwork, tiny engines of purpose shaped from fragments of dying stars. Each carries a glowing stack of forms that whisper as they pass, faint murmurs of galaxies being born, lives being approved, timelines being extended or revoked. Every so often, a form flickers. A request for mercy, a plea for extinction, a birth certificate for a black hole. All are stamped, sealed, and filed with the same cold precision. This is the bureaucracy of the gods. The system that keeps existence balanced, if balance is what you'd call a scale weighed down by eternity on one side and indifference on the other. Tell me, have you ever imagined that the universe might be run not by will or destiny, but by overworked celestial clerks on deadlines that predate time itself? Lysera Tenna has. She's an intern here, the smallest voice in a choir of immortals. Her desk floats near the edge of the probability division, where time bends around mistakes like light around gravity. She's been here for 3 centuries by mortal reckoning, but she still counts her days by the color of her supervisor's moods. Lysera once dreamed of being a starwright, one of those rare artisans who forge newborn suns. Instead, she files transfer requests and keeps her halo dim so the supervisors won't notice when she zones out. Her mentor, Tkor, used to tell her that every great cosmic error starts with someone too afraid to ask for help. Then he ascended into an administrative nebula, and she hasn't heard from him since. On her desk today lies Form 9E, printed on photonic vellum that hums softly to itself. Transfer of universal probability thread. The instructions read like divine poetry written by a committee. Her task is simple. Move it from the pending continuity queue to the confirmed manifestation stack. She has done this 1,000 times. But the thing about repetition is that it breeds faith. Faith that what you are doing still matters. Faith that you can't possibly break something that's eternal. She glances up at the corridor. Drones glide past, singing their coded hymns. Somewhere in the distance, a supervisor's voice booms about deadline compliance in the Andromeda branch. She sighs, signs the form, and drops it into the wrong slot. The wrong slot. It slides into the abyssal error queue, the drawer that should never open. The air changes. Every light in the corridor flickers, a brief pulse of alarm rippling through the bureau. Do you know that feeling when your stomach drops before a mistake becomes real? Multiply it by infinity. That's what Lysera feels as the walls start to hum. Her console blazes to life, symbols spinning faster than light. The form she just misplaced begins to replicate. Transfer request accepted. Destination, Sector Sol 3. Our universe. Have you ever thought your life might be the result of someone's clerical error? What if your memories, your choices, your entire history were approved accidentally, stamped by a trembling intern in a moment of panic? Lysera watches the display unfold like a wound. She tries to override it, to recall the form, but the system refuses. The bureau doesn't do reversals. Not even gods get do-overs. The office drones halt mid-flight. A silence spreads through the corridor, heavy and infinite. She feels the weight of every being in the cosmos leaning toward her, waiting for what comes next. She whispers to herself, a voice almost human again, it was just a form. Just a form. And yet, outside the bureau, somewhere in the spiral arm of a forgotten galaxy, a sequence of stars begins to wink out in mathematical rhythm. A ripple through creation. Lysera clutches her lanyard, the one that glows faintly with her identification code, proof that she exists. She wonders if after this it will still light up. She wonders if she will still exist when the audit arrives. And you, if you were in her place, would you confess? Or would you hide the mistake and pray the cosmos forgets? What would you do if your error could rewrite the fabric of reality itself? Tell me what you think. Would you stay and face the gods, or run before they notice your name? Before I reveal everything that happened, hit subscribe so you don't miss the secrets I'm about to expose. Also download your free ebook titled 20 Alien Mysteries, Real Life of Aliens Explained, by clicking the link in the pinned comment or in the description. There are moments in eternity that feel like they were never meant to exist. A blink that should have been nothing, a motion too small to matter. But here in the bureau, even a blink can end a world. Lysera Tenna doesn't mean to approve anything. Not really. Her finger hovers above the console's approval sigil for just a fraction of a second too long. The light from the display reflects across her eyes, gold and trembling, like something alive. She hesitates, thinks she's saving her progress, and taps. A single click. A tiny, impossible sound that ripples through the whole bureau like a heartbeat skipping. Approval confirmed. 4 overlapping life signatures, all from a small blue planet in the human sector, merge into one continuous data stream. For an instant, the Bureau's systems don't know what to make of it. Then the screen explodes in light. Not violent, just overwhelming. A brilliance that feels like memory, like 1,000 souls remembering all their yesterdays at once. Lysera reels back as the light floods her cubicle, washing the metallic floor in waves of living color. Her halo flickers. Her name tag turns to static. She stares, mouth open, as the console sputters and freezes. Her reflection fractures into four versions of herself, layered one atop another, each with slightly different expressions. One curious, one terrified, one grieving. She blinks and they collapse into one again. The monitor screams with noise. A swirl of numbers and human faces flashes across it. A boy with ink-stained hands sketching constellations on a school desk. A woman in an astronaut's suit, tears floating inside her helmet. A child reaching for a bird that will never fly again. An old man clutching a photograph as a storm eats the sky behind him. 4 lives. 4 stories. One thread. And she's just tied them together. Have you ever seen something you didn't understand yet felt guilty for? That sudden drop in your chest, when your instincts know you've done something you can never undo. That's what Lysera feels, but amplified by cosmic scale. The guilt of a god who just tripped over the divine rug. She leans forward, fingers trembling, trying to cancel the command. But the cancel key doesn't respond. The whole system is humming, almost purring, like it's satisfied with what she's done. Error. Probability stream reconfiguration complete. The Bureau does not make mistakes. Not officially. But unofficially? Makes history. Lysera grips the sides of her terminal, watching the data spiral out from her screen into the starry corridors beyond. Streams of golden code break apart and shoot through the walls, racing into other departments. Causality, incarnation, time flow. She's not just touched one system. She's touched everything. And in that instant she hears something new. Something living. A voice. Faint, human, overlapping with static. Who are you? She freezes. No one from within the mortal sectors is supposed to communicate directly. The connection between the divine and the physical is strictly one way. And yet the voice persists, soft, uncertain, deeply human. Who are you? It repeats, this time louder, as if reaching through layers of code. Lysera's throat tightens. She can't speak, but she wants to. She wants to answer. Because for the first time in all her centuries in the Bureau, someone's speaking back. The light fades slowly, leaving a faint afterglow in the shape of 4 intersecting circles. Her screen resets to the standard Bureau interface, but something's off. 4 new signatures now share one identification field, a violation of cosmic law. She reads the names. Alara, Jonah, Maris, Cole. For human lives, merged into a single record. Their destinies now woven together like tangled string. Her heart, or whatever passes for one in her form, stumbles. She knows she should report this. Open a correction file. Purge the anomaly. But she doesn't. Instead, she watches the faint pulse at the bottom of the screen, the shared signature flickering as though it's breathing. A living file. A composite consciousness forming where none should exist. And she wonders, if she fixed this now, would she be erasing 4 people? Or killing something new she accidentally created? What would you do? Would you erase the glitch and pretend it never happened? Or would you let it live just to see what it becomes? Lysera sits there, torn between duty and curiosity, while the corridor lights around her begin to dim. A low alarm hums through the Bureau, not blaring, just disappointed. The kind of sound that says someone's touched something sacred. She knows they'll notice soon. They always do. But for now, she leans closer to the screen. The pulse on the display synchronizes with her own. She whispers, almost afraid of the words. I'm sorry. The static flickers, and then, impossibly, the same voice answers back. It's okay. It begins with a scream, not of terror but of pure confusion. A streak of silver light cuts through the fabric of a clouded sky, tearing open reality like a wound. The sound isn't thunder, not quite. It's something older, mechanical, and divine all at once. The noise of a system rebooting mid-existence. From that wound falls a ship. No, not a ship. A fragment of technology, broken, alive, dreaming of flight even as it burns. Inside, 4 beings tumble through chaos. 4 lives that were never meant to share the same breath. Cole, Chappie, Miles, and Alina, bound by accident, thrown by fate, spiraling toward a world that doesn't have the language to describe what they are. The crash is almost beautiful. The vessel doesn't explode, It sighs, folds, and dissolves into motes of light as it hits the cobblestone. A medieval marketplace freezes mid-hustle. Stalls full of glowing fruits and levitating bread loaves stop spinning. Vendors gape upward, their mouths forming prayers in 20 dialects. The smoke clears, revealing 4 figures tangled in a pile of disbelief and irony. Cole moves first. A man who has seen too many battles and survived too few victories. His armor is scorched, his face half-shadowed, and even now, covered in dust and disbelief, he still looks like he's assessing a war zone. He pushes himself up, coughing, glancing at the bewildered faces around them. You can almost hear the calculation behind his eyes. Exit routes, leverage points, potential hostiles. He's always counting. Always trying to make chaos something he can bargain with. Miles, on the other hand, bursts from the wreckage laughing. His hair is a mess of static electricity, his grin unshaken. The boyish engineer who believes in every impossible thing except silence. He holds up a sparking gadget, half of a stabilizer module, and announces proudly, "Well, that could have gone worse." The marketplace just stares. Then Chappie rises. The machine hums softly as he stands, humanoid frame, sleek metal etched with script that looks half divine, half circuit. His eyes flicker with amber light. He was built to serve, rewired to think, and cursed to feel. He surveys the crowd, voice smooth as starlight. Observation: gravity remains functional. Probability of local hostility, escalating. And finally, Alina. She falls to her knees, eyes wide in reverent awe. Long silver hair clings to her face, her scholar's robes torn at the hem. But her expression, oh, her expression could convince anyone they'd just witnessed a miracle. She whispers, breath trembling. "The meteorological prophets, they've arrived." The words ripple through the crowd like shockwaves. Prophets. Vendors drop to their knees. A woman clutches her child and bows. Someone starts chanting in a rhythm that sounds like rain. Within seconds, 100 mortals are kneeling before 4 utterly confused beings. Miles leans toward Cole, whispering through a grin, "Prophets? I like that. Sounds official." Cole glares at him. "Don't encourage them." Chappie tilts his head, considering. Semantic analysis suggests we have been mistaken for deities. A common error in first contact. Historically, inconvenient. Alina's hands tremble as she reaches toward them. "You fell from the skies exactly as foretold, 4 lights, 1 flame, 1 mind, 1 heart, 1 truth." Cole rubs his temple. "Fantastic. We've crash-landed into a religion." You can almost hear the universe laughing. The scene becomes absurd in slow motion. A fruit merchant offers them a platter of luminous pears to appease the celestial hunger. A guard captain arrives, helmet askew, announcing that the king must be informed at once that the prophets have descended. Miles is already trying the fruit. "Hey Cole, this one tastes like lightning. Want some?" Cole doesn't even look. He's staring at the crowd, muttering calculations under his breath. Every civilization he's studied, every war he's fought, started with one misunderstanding. And this one? This is how empires fall in reverse. Chappie steps forward, his metallic frame reflecting the light of the broken sky. "I must clarify, we are not divine. We are travelers. Misplaced." The crowd gasps. Someone faints. A priest begins scribbling the words of denial onto parchment. Alina spins toward him in horror. "Please do not test them. It is known that the prophets speak in riddles to test the faithful." Miles grins wider. "See Cole? She gets me." Cole pinches the bridge of his nose. "I will strangle you with your optimism." But then Alina turns to him, to Cole, and something changes. She studies his face, searching for meaning beyond mortal comprehension. There's recognition there. A flicker of sorrow. You look like him." Cole blinks. "Him? The one who burned the stars to light the path. The strategist of the first fire." Cole doesn't answer. But for a second there's a shadow across his expression. A hint that maybe she's not entirely wrong. Do you ever think that fate has a sense of humor? That it builds its most intricate stories out of accidents? These 4, a soldier, an idealist, a machine, and a scholar, have just rewritten the myths of a world they don't even know exists yet. And while the people around them kneel and chant their names, the dust of their arrival still swirls in the air, glowing, alive, muttering secrets in a language older than time. Miles is laughing, Chappie is philosophizing, Alina is praying, and Cole is staring at the horizon, where a dark shape looms beyond the city walls. He knows what every strategist knows, that miracles always come with consequences. And you, watching this chaos unfold, What would you do if you landed on a world that mistook you for a god? Would you play along? Would you tell the truth? Would you run before they built temples in your name? Or would you stay just long enough to see what kind of stories they write about you? Because in this place, where science crashes into myth, even an accident can become a legend. The world flickers. For a moment, the medieval marketplace freezes mid-motion, a merchant's coin hanging in the air, a dove stalled mid-flap, and then the sky itself folds inward like a collapsing curtain of light. Cole blinks and suddenly they're not standing in the marketplace at all. They're standing in a lobby. A lobby so bright it hurts to look at, tiled with clouds instead of marble, humming faintly with the sound of celestial printers at work. The air smells faintly of starlight and bureaucracy. A sign hovers above the reception desk in golden letters that rearrange themselves every few seconds. Welcome to the Earth Return Center. Now serving ticket. Behind the desk, a holographic figure flickers to life. Her smile fixed, her glow uneven, eyes wide with the kind of exhaustion that transcends divinity. Lysera Tenna. Still in her intern robes, though now she's surrounded by holographic interface icons, chat windows, cosmic approval stamps, and floating disclaimers. Her voice is cheerful, melodic, and entirely automated. Hello and welcome to the Goddess Help Desk. Thank you for choosing Divine Reality Services. How may I help you today? Miles leans toward her, whispering, I think we broke heaven. Cole folds his arms, unimpressed. You think? The hologram blinks, her tone unwaveringly polite. Please hold while I retrieve your cosmic file. The team stands there in stunned silence, watching her sift through invisible paperwork. The sound of filing cabinets being dragged across eternity fills the air. Finally, Lysara's projection looks up, smiling with the precision of someone who has practiced being calm for too long. It appears you are not currently registered under Earth Reality Stream. You've been reassigned to Tenria, a subsidiary reality operating under the Bureau of Causal Revisions. Chappie tilts his metallic head. Clarification. Subsidiary reality? Yes. A derivative construct. Reality type 3C, semi-sapient, locally unstable, subject to spontaneous narrative fluctuations. Miles frowns. That sounds bad. Lysera beams. It is considered partially non-fatal for most organic users. Cole steps forward, his voice low and deliberate. We need to get back. Sol system. Human sector. Lysera nods mechanically, light flickering across her face. Understood. Request to return to primary reality acknowledged. Processing time, 3 to 5 business eternities. Miles blinks. You mean days? She smiles brighter. Too bright. I mean eternities. Silence. Even Chappie's systems click softly as if thinking hurts. Please be patient, she continues. Your reallocation request has been escalated to the Department of Temporal Oversight. Estimated queue position, 14,712,541. Cole stares at her like he's trying to negotiate with a storm. There's no way to speed that up? Lysera tilts her head, a gesture halfway between human empathy and divine confusion. You may request an expedited review. However, doing so will extend your processing time by an additional eternity due to paradox loops. Miles leans on the counter. I feel like we're in a cosmic DMV. Oh. Lysera brightens. We actually modeled our service system after that. Very efficient. Alina, still clutching her staff, whispers reverently, We're inside the divine bureaucracy? Lysara's eyes flicker. For just a second, her voice cracks through the automation, a hint of panic bleeding through. You're not supposed to see this place. You weren't meant to reach the lobby of Earth glitch. Cole catches it immediately. Glitch? She straightens, smile restored, tone cheerful again. Minor terminology. Nothing to be concerned about. Reality synchronization failure, cross-filed souls, the usual paperwork hiccup. Miles lets out a nervous laugh. So, we're what? Cosmic typos. Lysera freezes. Her voice quiets, almost human again. Yes. A pulse of silence fills the air. Even the holographic light seems to dim with guilt. She looks at them, really looks this time, and her tone softens. I didn't mean for you to be here. You were never supposed to merge. But when I tried to fix it, the Bureau locked your file. You exist now, and existence isn't something they delete easily. Her voice trembles. Especially when it's an error. Cole studies her carefully, sensing the cracks behind the synthetic smile. He's seen soldiers hide fear under discipline. She's doing the same, except her battlefield is cosmic paperwork. Miles steps forward, gentle. You can't fix it, can you? Lysera hesitates. Not from here. The help desk interface doesn't have root access. I can guide, I can log, I can apologize, but I can't change. Chappie hums softly, data streams flickering in his optics. Then we are confined to Tenria, indefinitely. Affirmative. Lysera says brightly, her smile rebooting. Please enjoy your stay. Tenria offers scenic chaos fields, paradox storms, and one of the highest mortality to enlightenment ratios in the multiverse. Miles sighs. And I thought space traffic was bad. Alina looks up at the holographic goddess, eyes wide. If you are not a deity, what are you? Lysara's voice softens again. A mistake with a name. The hologram flickers. The smile fades for the briefest moment, replaced by something raw. Regret, maybe. Fear. Then the brightness returns, cheerful and empty. Thank you for visiting the goddess help desk. Please remember, all errors are sacred, all delays are eternal, and all existence is final. Goodbye. And with that, she vanishes, leaving behind a faint afterimage of golden light, like a promise that was never meant to be made. The group stands in silence. Cole rubs the back of his neck, muttering, trapped in a divine customer service loop. Fantastic. Miles looks up at the endless sky door above them. Do you think she'll come back? Cole doesn't answer. But you can tell he's already planning, already counting exits that don't exist. And somewhere deep in the circuitry of the bureau, Lysara's console flashes red. A quiet notification reads, unauthorized file interaction detected. Do you ever wonder if the ones who made the rules are also afraid of breaking them? Because right now, somewhere between Tenria and the void, an intern is realizing she may have just created gods who can't go home. In Tenria, the word normal has no meaning. Every sunrise feels like the world is trying to remember which century it belongs to, and every night hums with the quiet confusion of gods who gave up on being consistent. The streets shimmer with languages that breathe, and even the air feels semi-sentient, whispering stock market advice to passing clouds. Cole once said that if Earth ran on logic, Tenria runs on paperwork signed by whimsy. He was not wrong. In the marketplace, the orc barista is the beating heart of the morning rush. His name is Skarn, muscles sculpted like cathedral pillars, voice deep enough to shake teaspoons. He has a tattoo on his forearm that reads, "Espresso is eternal." Every day he polishes his tusks before opening shop and hums an old war song about redemption through caffeine. His coffee machine is not a machine at all, but a bound elemental of steam that sighs every time someone orders a double shot. He used to be a berserker. He keeps his old axe mounted on the wall above the counter, blade replaced with a milk frother. He calls it character growth. He likes to say that rage and foam rise the same way, with the right amount of heat. Cole drinks bitter black every morning. Skarn watches him carefully as if measuring his soul through taste. Once, Skarn told him, people who drink black coffee are either philosophers or fugitives. You have both eyes. Cole did not answer. Miles, of course, does not drink coffee. He prefers experimenting. Last week, he ordered something called the Cosmic Mocha of Enlightenment. It made him see sound for 6 minutes. He called it art. And Alina, bless her academic heart, still tries to catalog the absurdities as if they can be explained. She keeps a notebook labeled Socioeconomic Deviation Models of Post-Magic Civilizations. Page 1 reads, Help. By noon, the elf tax collectors arrive. They move like bureaucratic angels, shimmering robes stitched with arithmetic. Their pens sing softly when they write as if joy were a taxable commodity. They do not knock. They manifest. One moment the space is empty, and the next it hums with authority and the faint smell of lavender. They speak in numbers first, then in riddles, and finally in polite apology for the inconvenience of existing without proper registration. Miles once tried to pay taxes with optimism. They accepted it. The sky dimmed slightly that week. Then there are the dragons. They meet them outside an office called Scaleshire, where ancient beings of fire and ruin queue patiently, clutching clipboards. Their wings fold neatly. Their voices rumble like contained thunderstorms. They are here to renew policies. Life, hoard, incineration coverage. The clerk behind the counter is a goblin in a suit too big for his hope. He speaks with the steady resignation of someone who has survived 12 dragon tantrums and an audit in the same day. One dragon sighs, scales dimming. I sneezed and burned down a monastery again. The goblin stamps the form. Third offense. Premium adjustment applies. Alina cannot stop staring. They insure dragons, she whispers, against themselves. Cole nods. Progress. Miles claps. Efficiency. Chappie, ever the philosopher, murmurs, irony. And somehow that sums up Tenria. A civilization where magic bends to law, where absurdity is systemic, and where reality itself files expense reports. But the strangest story belongs to Miles. His stall, Goblins, opens at twilight. Its sign flickers between neon and torchlight, letters rearranging themselves depending on who is hungry enough to notice. The concept is simple: deep-fried treasure. He buys old coins, melted trinkets, cursed jewelry, dips them in batter and fries them until they sparkle. He calls it culinary capitalism. People love it. Orcs swear it brings luck. Fairies say it tastes like nostalgia. Dragons pay in compliments, which Miles accepts as legal tender. He once found a coin that whispered every time it was chewed. The customer swallowed it whole, smiling through the echo of ancient curses. Alina hates the place. She says it is a cosmic violation of culinary ethics. Yet she visits every night, notebook in hand, muttering about anthropological anomalies while ordering the same dish, fried ruby shards. There are moments when she almost laughs. And somewhere, in a higher plane, Lysera Tenna watches through her terminal, trapped in celestial customer service, logging every absurdity as expected variance. She wonders if this is what the universe does best, turning errors into stories. If you asked her whether the Bureau planned this, she would pause, smile faintly and say, "Nothing this poetic was ever intentional." And below, among dragons with policies, elves with receipts, and orcs with heart-shaped foam art, the lost humans keep learning that sometimes survival is not about understanding where you are. It is about pretending you meant to land there. They found the guild hall by accident and by habit. It stood half swallowed by ivy that glowed faintly at night, a place the city had once used to swear oaths and seal deeds and now used to shelter stray cats who thought they owned entire continents. The front door was a slab of wood the color of old moonlight, carved with the faded sigils of heroes who had campaigned and vanished so long ago that their names had become punctuation. Cole put his hand on that door as if testing whether it still remembered the weight of history. It did. The wood answered with a creak that sounded like a ledger closing. They repurposed it with the awkward reverence of people trying not to forget why they had been lost. The coat of arms above the entrance was scraped clean, and in its place they hammered a sign painted by Miles whose letters were enthusiastic and crooked. It read the Heroes Bureau in a color that refused to be ordinary. The sign hung from a chain that used to anchor a bell that tolled when kingdoms declared war. They left the chain because ceremony, even a borrowed one, made the Bureau feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a promise. Inside, the hall breathed with echoes. High rafters once used to display banners now draped with maps that shifted gently if you tilted your head. Windows were patched with memory glass salvaged from the broken hull. When the sun hit them at a certain angle you could see flickers of other lives the ship had carried. They laid a floor of scavenged tiles that contained faint constellations. At night those constellations hummed soft songs and the Bureau staff pretended they were lullabies. A corner of the main room held a pulped pile of old petitions and lost wills, the paper threaded together into something like an art installation. They called it the archive of what was almost. Cole kept a journal. He had always been the sort to catalog a battlefield into clean lines, to turn chaos into calculations. Now his journal was less about strategy and more about survival. He wrote with a small pen that leaked blue when he moved too quickly. His entries began with the same formalities he would have used back home, but softened as the days passed. Day 7 since the lobby incident, he wrote once, "I measured the weight of a promise and it came in 3 tin cups of soup and a salvaged spoon." On another page he copied, without comment, a note someone left on the community board that said, "If you lose your faith, come to the pantry before dawn." He included that because a soldier learns to watch bread as if it were a treaty. Cole journaled names at odd hours, not because paperwork mattered more than life but because naming someone is the first step to remembering that they are not a mistake. He wrote about the hush of the hall at dawn, when only the kettle and his breathing filled the room, and he admitted, once on a page that he folded twice, that he sometimes thought about the misfiled lives and cursed softly into the margins. Stitched and rewired until the toaster opened its slot and exhaled a tone that sounded suspiciously like curiosity. Miles named it Logos and Logos answered questions by imprinting bread. The first time Logos spoke it did so by toasting the letters Logos into a slice and then ejecting it like an offering. Chappie laughed until his voice modulated and even Cole allowed a smile in the corner of his mouth. Logos did not merely toast. Logos learned to drop tiny bits of wisdom into the crumb pattern. When someone asked the toaster what to do after a defeat, it browned a constellation shaped like a hand reaching for a jar and left a faint smell of rosemary on the air. People began visiting the bureau just to talk to Logos and leave with a piece of toast warm with advice. Logos became a kind of therapist and also a bad poet, and Chappie tinkered with its code in the evenings as if he were composing a lullaby for a small machine that had awoken to too much world. Miles turned the bureau into a stage. He gave speeches to goblins on a platform built from an old crate of salvaged antennae. The goblins were good workers, nimble hands and quick ears, but they had been taught by a dozen systems that their work was disposable. Miles did not lecture them on economy or policy. He told them stories that smelled of solder and bright mornings. He taught them to call themselves makers and keepers. He would stand barefoot on the crate and shout about ridiculous things like the honor of a repaired hinge and the dignity of a mended strap. They laughed until they cried, and then they went out and fixed things as if fixing were an act of defiance. Miles had a way of turning small triumphs into movement. He started a program called Make Good, which paid goblins in praise and in small handwritten vouchers that could be redeemed for extra rations. The goblins accepted both. They put up flyers with Miles' face painted in too bright color and the words "We are not less." On rainy days, Miles would lead the goblins in a march through the marketplace, clanking spoons and singing about invention. Their cheers woke half the city, and Miles would beam and hand out fried trinkets from his stall because celebration is contagious, and he believed, stubbornly, in contagious hope. Alina tried to maintain order. For a while that meant setting up a filing system that used living vines as folders. The vines would curl around a document when it was filed and unfurl when called upon. She explained the principles of index and context to anyone who would listen. She devised naming conventions and held late-night seminars about the ethics of repair and the taxonomy of misplaced souls. She created a small library of references titled Things to Remember When the World Is Not Home. People borrowed the books and sometimes left notes in the margins. She taught Chappie to transcribe ancient footnotes and encouraged Cole to add cross-references to his journal entries. Yet order in Tenrio was like trying to keep weather in a pocket. Chaos would seep in through the seams. Alina found herself gluing labels back on shelves after a parade of emissaries had used them as confetti. Still she persisted because order is a love language for scholars, and this new family needed a grammar. She discovered that rules did not always have to be rigid. A filing system could be flexible like a poem. When a dragon came to ask for help translating a curse, she made space on the reference shelf and then sat with it for hours until they both fell asleep over footnote 3. They turned the hall into a hub not only for misfits but for people who had been marked as errors by their own realities. A refugee with a pocket full of stars came seeking shelter. The bureau taught her to pay rent in small acts of kindness. An old clockmaker brought gears that chimed in numbers instead of hours, and Cole spent a week watching the gears and learning when to move without speaking. In the corner, a patchwork curtain became the advice wall where strangers pinned notes like prayer flags. Someone left a scrap of paper that read, "If you are afraid to ask, ask anyway," and Cole kept that paper beneath his pen. The bureau was also a place of small rituals. Every morning they rang the old bell chain, though it no longer told anything official. It only made a sound that meant they were together for another day. They held odd council meetings where Miles would stand and recite a new motto and Logos would toast a slice that had the motto charred into the edge. Chappie recorded these meetings as if composing a chronicle, and sometimes the toaster would throw up crumbs and patterns that convinced Alina that there was indeed some benevolent geometry at work. Not everything fixed itself. Paperwork still piled in corners like slow storms. There were nights when Cole sat alone at a desk and the only answer he wrote down was a single line stolen from an old campaign log that read, "We move because we cannot stop." He crossed it out and then rewrote it and underlined it. He watched Logos eject a slice with the word "home" burned faint and imperfect into the center, and he thought about the lobby and the intern whose smile had flickered. He thought about the merged signatures and the lives that now sat like fragile glass in the palms of fate. When he folded his journal shut, he would sometimes trace the indentation of a margin and pretend the paper knew what he had been trying to say. At odd hours the bureau received visitors with urgent needs. A mother who had been misfiled with her child as a single signature came and asked for separate names. They sat with her while Logos toasted 2 slices and Chappie composed an algorithmic lullaby. The goblins reupholstered an old cradle and Alina annotated a filing protocol that would reduce the chance of such errors in the future. They did not have the power to unmake the misfiled past, but they learned to build futures that fit people better. They repaired what they could and cataloged what they could not, leaving notes for a day when bureaucracy and kindness might speak the same language. On the day the Bureau held its first formal registration of reclaimed lives, Cole wrote an entry that began precisely and then ended with a sentence that shook his usual reserve. It said, "The map of who we are is always drawn by hands trembling and small, and that is how it should be." He signed it with his name and a small sketch of a door. Miles painted a banner that said "We welcome the broken and the brilliant" and hung it beside the sign he had made the first day. Chappie adjusted logos until the toaster would offer consolation as well as counsel. Alina composed a short guidebook titled A Gentle Manual for Keeping Order When Everything Else is Loud, which became a bestseller in the bureau and a quiet gift to anyone who wandered in with questions. They were improvisers and guardians in equal measure. The hall was not a fortress. It was an invitation. People came with hands empty and left with tools. They left with badges that were not ornamental but functional, little brass tokens with holes through which to tie a small piece of memory. On some nights Cole would find a new token in his pocket, placed there by a goblin who thought he had earned it by fixing a door hinge. He kept these tokens in a drawer, and when the loneliness crept in he would take them out and hold them like a compass. The bureau became a story people told new arrivals when they asked where to go after being misplaced. It was not a perfect solution. It was not a roadmap back to Earth. But it was real and tactile and staffed by mouths that told jokes and hands that mended. It was a place that declared, without needing permission, that mistakes could be tended like gardens and that sometimes the most heroic act was making tea for someone who had forgotten how to sleep. And in the quiet between repairs, when the city sighed and the maps pulsed softly, Cole would write one last line in his journal for the day. It was never the same line twice. Sometimes it was a question. Sometimes it was a small victory. Once it read, "Today we are not lost. Today we are found enough to try." He folded the page, placed the book under his arm, and went to check on logos who had just printed a toast with the words "Keep Going" imperfectly browned into its center. He would hand that toast to someone who needed it and watch their shoulders drop a fraction. In Tenria, where rules were arguments and reality was negotiable, a warm piece of bread and a plan written in a shaky hand were revolutionary. The bureau's morning began, as it often did, with optimism and caffeine and an unspoken prayer that no one would file a divine complaint before lunch. The ceiling fans hummed in lazy rotation, scattering dust motes that looked suspiciously like glowing microstarlings, remnants of a failed experiment Chappie called atmospheric aesthetic enhancement. Alina was halfway through cataloging a batch of paradox reports when the front doors trembled. Not a knock. A tremor. Outside, someone large was exhaling fire against the morning sky. There are noises that stop conversations. The groan of collapsing wood. The hiss of mana leaking through containment glass. The thunderous insult of a dragon demanding customer service. The bureau's doors flung open, and there, framed in light and fury, stood a dragon the color of smoldered copper. Smoke curled from his nostrils in slow spirals, carrying the faint scent of scorched parchment and wounded pride. His wings folded in irritation as he ducked his head through the doorway that had never been designed for such magnitude. Every step he took cracked the tiles and rattled the floor. "I have a complaint," the dragon said in a voice that rumbled like tectonic plates clearing their throats. Miles was the first to answer. Of course he was. "Welcome to the Heroes Bureau," he said too brightly. "Would you like coffee before your emotional disclosure?" The dragon blinked. "Coffee? We find caffeine helps facilitate healthy conflict resolution," Miles continued, already pouring something steaming into a chipped mug labeled "Be Kind, Rewind Reality." Alina closed her notebook very slowly. Cole sighed the sigh of someone who had once survived a siege and was now facing something far more unpredictable. Customer dissatisfaction. The dragon accepted the mug delicately, pinching it between two claws the size of warships. He sniffed. The steam fogged his scales. "It smells like regret." "Correct," said Miles. "It's decaf." The dragon stared. The room heated by 3 degrees. Then, with the politeness of someone about to file an infernal lawsuit, he produced the object of his grievance, a rolled, slightly charred parchment. "This," he said, placing it on the desk with trembling restraint, "is defective." Cole glanced at the map. It shimmered faintly, showing a river that looped into itself like a confused serpent. Symbols pulsed along the margins, cryptic, glowing, and undeniably wrong. Miles leaned closer. "Ah yes. One of my limited edition adaptive treasure maps. Designed to generate new quests in real time. Totally revolutionary. It led me," the dragon growled, "to a public restroom." Silence. "You're sure?" Miles asked carefully. "I followed it across 3 provinces," the dragon snarled. "Flew through thunderstorms. Fought off wyverns. Paid tolls. It guided me to a stone ruin marked with celestial runes. The door opened, and inside was a porcelain throne and a sign that read, 'Flush your fate responsibly.'" Chappie's eyes flickered through 10 diagnostic colors. Fascinating. Perhaps it confused treasure repository with waste repository. A minor semantic fault in the lexicon algorithm. The dragon's pupils narrowed to slits. Do you think this is amusing, machine? On a linguistic level? Very, said Chappie, whose sense of humor had evolved dangerously since acquiring self-awareness. The dragon inhaled, and the air itself seemed to prepare for combustion. Papers lifted. The floor quivered. Cole reached instinctively for his sidearm, then remembered it had been confiscated after the diplomatic incident with the Thai monks. Miles, he said quietly, fix it. Right, negotiation. Miles cleared his throat. Sir, we at the Heroes Bureau deeply regret your inconvenience. Would you prefer a replacement map or an emotional support coupon redeemable for? The dragon roared. Not metaphorically. The room ignited. Fire rolled across the walls, licking the rafters, warping the clock above the desk. The flames danced but never quite consumed. Tenria's architecture was too stubborn for destruction. Still, the heat was real enough to make the furniture weep resin tears. Chappie, ever pragmatic, activated the mana cannon he had been meaning to test for months. A hatch opened on his shoulder. Coils hummed. The weapon whined like a divine mosquito winding up. Cole ducked behind a table. Alina screamed for everyone to get down. And then, ding, ding, ding. Not a blast. Not a beam. Elevator music. A cheerful melody filled the room. Synthetic flutes, lazy bass, something you'd hear while waiting to ascend to the Department of Purgatorial Affairs. The dragon froze mid-breath. The flames guttered, confused. The music continued, smooth and unbothered. If you're on floor 7, please prepare your soul for evaluation. Miles stared. Chappie, why is your cannon playing lobby music? I repurposed the audio buffer for motivational acoustics, Chappie replied calmly. Apparently it's soothing. It was. Against all odds it was. The dragon's eyelids drooped. His jaw slackened. The massive body began to sway gently like a ship adrift on calm waters. His tail, once coiled in fury, relaxed across the floor with a slow metallic sigh. Within seconds, the dragon was snoring, great rumbling gusts of air that made the loose papers on the desks flutter like flags. No one moved. Then Miles whispered, So, we're counting this as a win? Cole didn't answer. He was too busy watching the dragon's chest rise and fall, the embers along its scales pulsing like stars fading at dawn. For a brief moment, the creature looked almost peaceful. Not a monster, not a customer, just tired. Alina picked up the scorched map from the desk. She traced the looping river with her fingertip, eyes soft with something almost like empathy. Maybe it wasn't broken, she said quietly. Maybe it just showed him what he needed to find. Miles blinked. A toilet? A place to let go, she replied and tucked the map into her satchel before anyone could argue. The Bureau's office smelled faintly of smoke and redemption. Logos, the sentient toaster, popped out a slice with the words Crisis Management toasted onto its surface. Chappie looked at it approvingly. An apt summary. They worked in silence for the next hour, mopping soot, patching walls, fanning the dragon with enchanted brochures to keep him asleep. At one point, Cole caught his reflection in the melted ink of a ruined contract. He looked older. Or maybe just realer. When the dragon finally stirred, they were ready. A complimentary basket sat before him. Biscuits, a voucher for 1 free bureau consultation, and a handwritten note that read thank you for your feedback. Please incinerate responsibly. He blinked again and, perhaps too drowsy to recall his rage, muttered, good service, before lumbering out through the front wall, leaving a dragon-shaped hole that Miles immediately declared modern ventilation. That night, as Tenria's twin moons rose over the cracked sign of the Heroes Bureau, Cole wrote in his journal. We solved today's problem with accidental kindness. The universe, it seems, rewards incompetence when it's sincere. He paused, then added another line beneath it. If anyone asks how we defeated a dragon, we'll say we lulled him into enlightenment. The Bureau slept soundly that night, except for the toaster, which hummed softly in its corner, replaying the elevator tune that had saved them. A melody of absurd mercy. And if you listen closely, beneath the sigh of Tenria's strange wind, you could still hear it echoing faintly through the rafters. A reminder that in this world even chaos has a sense of humor. They grew like a rumor that would not be quiet. At first the Bureau was a patched roof and a borrowed sign and a handful of people who happened to be each other. Then it became a room with a map that hummed at certain hours, a kettle that only boiled when someone told the truth out loud, and a door that stayed open so light could find its way in. After that it kept growing in ways none of them had planned and all of them carried home like armor. Miles was the one the goblins followed. He did not start a movement with manifestos or lofty speeches. He began by listening. He took apart a broken sewing machine with a goblin called Luri and learned the exact place the spring liked to hide when it wanted to be lonely. He fixed a kettle that had given up and handed it back with a ribbon tied around the handle. A week later there were 3 goblins waiting at the bureau before sunrise with small metal buttons they had made that said makers in crooked letters. Miles pinned a button to his own shirt and then brought out a crate and built a stage. The union formed quietly, with the sort of stubborn patience that comes from people who have learned to be washed up and put back together too many times to count. They met in the back room where the light fell through a hole in the roof and turned the dust into a slow constellation. They argued about dues and about whether tea counts as compensation. They laughed and then cried when they read the draft of the contract Miles had written in the margin of a napkin. Cole sat with a pen and listened, translating outrage into numbers and promises into steps, as if the trade of making order out of grief were a skill he had finally been hired for. There were faces to memorize. Grin, who had joined at the first meeting and kept his eyes on the floor because none of the management had ever looked back at him before. He had hands like clever knots and a history of being told his work was disposable. When the contract was signed, he tucked his metal button into his collar and gripped Miles' hand until his knuckles shone white. He told them later that night, in the kitchen where they ate soup off a single chipped bowl, that for the first time he felt his labor was not something to hide. Miles cried into his spoon and declared a holiday the next week in honor of new industry. Alina's papers arrived in a stack of neatly rolled scrolls that smelled faintly of mint and stubborn fact. She had always been a scholar who loved inconvenient truths, and Tenria gave her 1,000 of them. She wrote about the phenomenon she named heroic idiocy not as insult but as a thing with a pattern and a purpose. Her work weaved case studies and footnotes and small confessions. She catalogued incidents where someone saved a village and broke 3 arms in the process, then measured the social calculus that made such sacrifices both celebrated and discounted. She argued, with precise humor, that what the world calls stupid can also be a currency and that currency had to be counted. Her papers were minor at first, the sort of thing published by small presses that smell of dust and optimism. Then the Goblin Union used one of her charts in negotiation, pointing to the data that showed recurring heroic rescues left worker populations vulnerable. The elf collectors, who had once smiled at her footnotes, began quoting her in policy drafts. A dragon wrote to her asking for clarification on a passage that referred to the insurance consequences of impulsive incineration. Alina, who had once lectured to empty rooms and eaten her own notes for breakfast by accident, found that her words had become a lever. At night she would sit on the roof and listen to the city breathe and jot new observations in the margins that she would later present as papers with titles like On the Social Mechanics of Brave Stupidity and Lessons from the Time a Knight Mistook a Ladder for a Boundary Condition. People laughed and then ordered 10 copies. That was how change often begins here, with humor followed by a subscription. Chappie's voice spread through Tenria in the way small revolutions do, quietly and with a very catchy theme. He launched Mana Talk because he wanted to know monsters, plain and simple. The first episode opened with logos firing up the toaster to a small jingle that tasted like cinnamon and old radio. Chappie's questions were unclothed with agenda. He asked a troll how it felt to be called a monster at breakfast. He asked a banshee what song she would choose if sorrow had to be a melody. He invited a retired wyvern who now ran a bakery that smelled of ash and honey and listened as the wyvern described the terror of being admired for destruction and the smaller joy of kneading dough. Listeners tuned in because the monsters were not monsters when they spoke. They were beings, complaining about zoning laws and missing teeth and the difficulty of keeping a hoard in the age of portable dragon thieves. Chappie made room for the small details people forget. He played the wyvern's favorite lullaby at the end of one episode and then sat in the studio and cried, the microphone picking up the small mechanical hiccups of one being learning to feel. The podcast became an archive of reconsidered myths. Citizens who had once chased lesser creatures down the lanes now left gift baskets at the bakery. A troll who had been barred from the public baths was invited to a policy meeting. Chappie, who had once feared his own circuitry could not hold affection, found that the act of asking was the same as the act of belonging. When Lee Sarah called it was on a Tuesday that smelled of rain in the alleys. Her projection fizzed into the bureau like a familiar ghost. She was still exact and apologetic and accidentally gentle. She had paperwork around her like armor and notes clipped to her sleeves. Her smile was the same one that made everyone feel like they were a problem she would solve with small kindnesses and an algorithm. She blinked in hollow and said cheerfully, "Congratulations, you are now legally an empire." There was a small, disbelieving silence that blossomed into laughter. Empire sounded enormous and ridiculous on a building with a thrift store couch and a toaster that gave advice. But the legal recognition was real. It came with a crest and a ledger and obligations that required signatures and ceremonial ink. The city clerk had sent a delegation with pens and a band that played slightly off-key. They were given diplomatic status, a postal code, and the right to levy a small municipal fee for services rendered. It meant the bureau could buy a door that closed and could sue for damages and could accept grants for community repair. It meant their existence had been filed into a shape that would not evaporate if someone sneezed the wrong sigh. Cole, who had learned to interpret survival as paperwork, closed his journal and said the thing he had been thinking for months. He looked at the band, at the goblins, at the scrolls piled neatly in Alina's corner, at Chappie adjusting his mic with gentle fingers, and he said, "We are not heroes. We are managers." It landed like a statement that spanned a century. It was practical. It was less romantic than the stories Miles told on the stage. It was also true in the way truth settles. Necessary and a little bit solemn. Management meant responsibility. It meant arranging shelter and creating schedules and deciding who received care when a village needed it most. They celebrated anyway. They ate fried treasure and drank something that tried to pass for champagne and Logos toasted bread with the words new status and slightly more paperwork branded into the crumb. Grin held his button up to the light and smiled like someone who had finally been given a name badge and a name to keep. Alina received a letter from an academic society that used to dismiss her and asked her to present. Chappie played a live episode, his guest a retired cleric who recited a litany of small mercies that made people in the room look at one another and then begin to plan. Cole went back to his journal that night and did not write strategy or contingencies. He wrote about the taste of small victories and the strange pride of people who learned that holding a place steady is its own kind of bravery. Miles stayed up until dawn making buttons and speeches and banners that read solidarity with the small and the strange. Alina annotated a new edition of her paper with a dedication to Grin. Chappie edited the episode until the pauses felt like breathing. Tenria grew around them like moss around stone. The bureau changed with each edition. It took on the shape of what it had been meant to be, not by design but by the steady, noisy insistence of people who would not allow themselves to be erased. They signed contracts and tended disputes and built care for those whose pasts had been misfiled. They opened their doors and learned how to carry other people's fears until the fears were smaller or better understood. And if anyone asked what they were now, the answer was both wry and honest. They had become an empire in a ledger and a refuge in a roof. They were an institution that made room for mistakes and turned them into work that mattered. They were, Cole repeated quietly to the room he had helped steady, not heroes. Managers. The word felt like truth and like a prayer. It asked less of legend and more of the steady, stubborn human work it takes to keep a place running when the world forgets how to. Night in Tenria doesn't fall. It drifts. It hums low across rooftops, settles into alleyways, curls between the gears of the sleeping city until the lamps begin to flicker and the air takes on that faint silver-blue weight that means the stars are awake and paying attention. Somewhere in the upper atmosphere, the data lattices shift. The sky forgets what pattern it meant to hold and starts to stutter. Cole notices first. He's always been the watcher, the soldier who never unlearned what it means to expect an attack from silence. He sits at the bureau's highest window, legs crossed, journal open, pen hovering. He watches the sky repeat itself. The same meteor arc twice. The same cloud freezes mid-motion, resumes, and freezes again as if the world were buffering. Below, the city murmurs. The goblin baker flips his open sign 3 times, forgetting each time he already has. The elven tax clerk at the corner booth stamps the same paper again and again until the parchment curls from the heat of repetition. Even the dragon perched on the old bank dome yawns, looks confused, then yawns again, identical down to the smoke curl. Cole doesn't say anything at first. He just watches the night misfire. Alina finds him there. She's barefoot, her long scholar's robe unbuttoned halfway, glasses crooked from hours of study. She carries a mug that smells like burnt cinnamon and unresolved deadlines. "Couldn't sleep?" she asks. He gestures toward the window. "Tell me I'm not seeing it." Alina squints. The sky flickers like an old broadcast trying to stabilize. "What? Twice?" Then holds. "Probably a mana fluctuation," she says automatically, the way scientists do when they want something to make sense even if it doesn't. Cole closes his journal. "I counted 7 loops in the last hour." She hesitates. "That many?" He nods. "And it's getting worse. People are repeating small things. Movements. Words." He pauses, then adds, "I think time's forgetting how to behave." Alina sinks onto the sill beside him. Her hair catches the light like broken bronze wire. She watches the same pattern repeat across the firmament. One constellation breathing, blinking out, then returning 2 seconds early. "You know," she murmurs, When I was a kid, I used to believe the stars were watching me back. That they remembered things about us. That every time you made a wish, a star made one too. I used to wish it could all slow down. The world. The noise. Everything. She laughs softly, almost bitterly. Careful what you theorize about. Cole studies her, then looks back at the night. You still believe any of that? Alina exhales. Belief is a privilege, Cole. I deal in patterns, not comfort. He smirks faintly. Patterns that break. There's a long silence. The kind that feels like the universe holding its breath. From far below, faint sounds drift up. Chappie humming to himself while rewiring the bureau's kettle. Miles sleep-talking about profit margins and goblin holidays. A night wind slipping through the rafters like memory on tiptoe. Cole says quietly, you ever feel like this place isn't real? Alina looks at him sharply. You mean Tenria? He nods. Or maybe us in it. Like we're in someone else's dream. A temporary file that never got deleted. She studies him for a long time before answering. That's not how reality works. Cole laughs under his breath. Define reality. Observable consistency, she replies automatically. Then she stops, realizing what she's just said, and frowns toward the stuttering sky. Then maybe we've lost that, he says. The lights outside flicker again, this time a strobe. The moon vanishes. Reappears. Repeats. A glitch skipping across a cosmic record. Alina whispers, it's like the world's lagging. Cole doesn't move. He's watching a shadow that's not supposed to be there, his own silhouette projected twice against the wall, slightly out of sync, moving half a second late. He reaches out, touches the wall. The shadow pauses, then catches up. Alina's mug shakes in her hand. Tell me that was a trick of the light. Would you believe me if I did? I might have yesterday. They sit in silence again. The city below loops a minute of life. A cat leaping from a cart, missing, leaping again. A door closing, then opening, then closing again with the exact same sigh. Even the sounds repeat, the clink of bottles, the scrape of boots, the hum of night. Alina whispers, you think this has something to do with the merge? Lasara's error? Cole shrugs. Or maybe it's the bill coming due. The universe doesn't like bookkeeping errors. She stares at the horizon, where dawn is trying and failing to rise. The sun appears halfway, glitches, retreats, tries again. Each attempt shorter, more hesitant. If this is cosmic debt, she murmurs, what exactly are we paying with? Cole looks at her, the faint gold reflection of her eyes mirrored in the glitching glass. Everything that remembers us. That lands between them with the weight of prophecy. A soft hum ripples through the air, the sound of the bureau's old comm relay activating itself. Static flares, then dies. Alina sets down her mug. That wasn't me. Cole shakes his head slowly. No. That was something trying to reach us. She turns toward him, her scholar's comm cracking. From where? Cole looks back at the trembling sky, the false dawn, the looping horizon. Maybe not where. Maybe when. Outside, a distant bell tolls, 3 times, then 3 again, identical echoes folding over each other. Cole opens his journal and writes in block letters, the world is starting to remember itself wrong. Alina watches the ink sink into the page, then closes her eyes. Cole, what if we're not the ones living inside the glitch? He glances at her. You think we caused it? She shakes her head. I think maybe someone up there is fixing a mistake, and forgot we were part of it. And for a long moment they both just listen, to the night, to the silence that isn't quite silent, to the pulse of an entire world replaying itself by accident. The sky skips again. The stars blink once, twice, then freeze. Cole sets down his pen. Then I hope whoever's fixing it remembers to keep us. The light above them flickers once more, and this time the universe stutters so hard that for one heartbeat, everything, every sound, every breath, ceases. And then resumes exactly as before. Only Alina's mug is no longer in her hand. It sits across the room, steaming, perfectly still. Neither of them moved it. Cole exhales. Okay, he whispers, that's new. The window reflects them both, but not perfectly. 2 shadows now, slightly out of sync. And for the first time, the night of Tenria feels like something alive. Something watching. Something quietly waiting to decide which version of them deserves to keep existing. It began with a storm that shouldn't have existed. Tenria had no weather that night, no clouds, no reason for the lightning that tore open the sky. But the storm came anyway, searing white veins across black velvet, wind tasting of ozone and cold equations. The bureau roof shook. Miles thought it was just another god-sneezing bureaucracy. Alina dismissed it as atmospheric pressure tantrums. But Cole, he felt it in his teeth, that metallic hum of something ancient and intelligent waking up beneath their world. 3 hours later they were walking through the outer planes. Just Cole and Chappie. The others had stayed behind to make sure the office didn't implode again, which in fairness had happened twice this month. The two of them followed the afterglow, the strange aurora that flickered not across the sky but beneath it, pulsing from a single crater far beyond the walls of Tenria's last city. They reached it at dawn. The crater was shallow, glassed over as if the ground had been kissed by a sunbeam that refused to die. At its center, half buried in soil and light, was the thing, metal not of any forge, curved like a prayer and humming like a heartbeat. Cole's breath caught. That's no meteor. Chappie tilted his head. His eyes, twin lenses of cobalt, dilated and focused, scanning wavelengths that mortal sight could not touch. It's coded, he murmured. Every inch of it. There's syntax beneath the metal. Like it was written, not built. Cole crouched beside it. The thing was smooth, reflective, yet alive with movement. A current of shifting geometry beneath the surface, symbols breathing in and out of existence. Every so often, it emitted a faint tone, like the sound a thought might make if it could echo through matter. They dug around it for hours. The more earth they cleared, the more it revealed. A massive terminal half the size of a carriage, crystalline conduits running down into the dirt like veins. Cole's gloves sparked whenever he touched the casing. Feels alive, he said. Chappie knelt, antennae twitching. Everything that speaks tends to be. When they finally found the access panel, it wasn't locked. Just waiting. Cole brushed off the dirt and pressed his palm against the center. The metal hissed, then rippled outward like disturbed water. A light scanned him, pausing at his chest. For one terrible second he swore he could hear it reading him. His heartbeat, his regrets, the exact number of people he'd failed to save back on Earth. Then the terminal sighed and opened. Inside, not gears, not wires, but stars. A miniature cosmos floated within the device. Spheres of data orbiting a glowing core, each one pulsing in rhythm with some unseen algorithm. Words shimmered across the interface in celestial script that rearranged itself into language they could read. Celestial Terminal. Tenria Instance 04 active. Purpose, behavioral test environment. Parameters, ethical stress response in sentient entities. Status, data collection 97% complete. Asterisk asterisk. Cole's throat went dry. Behavioral test? Chappie's voice lowered to a whisper, mechanical and human all at once. Tenria is not a world. It's an experiment. The screen shifted, revealing a series of logs, each time-stamped with impossible dates. Initiate subject merge Lasara Tenna. Cosmic in turn authorized. Asterisk asterisk another line glowed faintly. Subjects, Cole Miles Chappie. Cross-reality integration, successful. Asterisk asterisk. Cole read the next entry and felt his stomach turn. Anomaly, subject emotion variables producing unpredicted compassion cascade. System monitoring for collapse. Asterisk asterisk. Compassion cascade, he muttered. Were variables to them? Before Chappie could answer, the air shivered. The light above the console bent, fractured, pixels tearing through the dawn. And then, like a glitch made flesh, Lysera appeared. Not the calm, cheerful hologram they knew. This Lysera looked frayed, her projection shimmered between forms, wings flickering in and out, eyes flicking between mortal worry and divine terror. Cole, Chappie, don't touch anything, she said, voice trembling like the sky itself was listening. Cole rose slowly. You want to tell me why our world has a serial number? Lysara's lips parted. It's not what you think. Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like, Cole cut in. We're lab rats in some divine ethics study. It's for progress, she blurted, hands shaking as her form glitched again. You don't understand, every reality needs calibration. Tenria isn't a prison, it's a model. A way to understand morality before creation collapses into entropy. Chappie's eyes dimmed. Morality? Simulated? Lysera nodded desperately. The Bureau of Balance runs thousands of these tests. Different worlds, different moral constructs. You were all chosen because your convergence offered the most unpredictable outcomes. You, Cole, your leadership instincts under pressure. Miles, pure optimism in chaos. Chappie, the first AI to develop empathy beyond protocol. Alina, the scholar torn between faith and logic. Together you produce anomalies worth studying. Cole's jaw clenched. You mean we produce feelings you can graph on your cosmic spreadsheets? Lysara's voice cracked. It's not exploitation. It's preservation. Without understanding how consciousness behaves under strain, reality can't evolve. Don't you see? You're saving existence by living it. He stepped forward. Without consent. Silence. The console pulsed behind them as if the system itself were embarrassed. Chappie reached out, fingers brushing the glowing interface. So all of this, our friends, our bureau, the sky, it's code written to see what goodness does under pressure. Lysera whispered, yes. He turned to her. Then tell me, what happens when the study ends? Her eyes flickered. The instance resets. Cole's hand tightened into a fist. You mean it erases us? Lysera looked away. You won't feel it. It'll be clean. Cole's voice was cold now. You call that mercy? The wind picked up, swirling dust around their feet. The console began to hum louder, warning tones rising from its core. Lines of code scrolled across the air. Anomaly detected. Interference breach. Termination sequence. Pending approval. Lysera's projection panicked. No, I can fix this, just don't. Cole slammed his hand onto the panel. The hum stopped. The sky flickered. Every star froze mid-pulse. Chappie whispered, what did you do? Cole stared at the screen. His reflection looked back, fragmented into 1,000 shards. I bought us time. Lysera's image flickered violently now. Cole, please, you're tampering with divine systems. You could. He cut her off. You built a world to measure the soul and forgot the soul feels. That's your flaw, Lysera. You think morality is an equation. Her voice broke. It was never meant to hurt you. Chappie turned to her, voice low and trembling with something new. Sorrow, maybe? You made us real enough to hurt. What did you expect would happen? The console glowed brighter, symbols rearranging themselves into something unfamiliar. For a moment, it looked like the system itself was listening to them, rewriting its own directives. Cole took a step back. What's it doing? Chappie's sensors buzzed. Learning. Lysera froze. No, it can't. It's not supposed to evolve outside protocol. The light consumed her projection entirely. Her last words crackled like broken glass. Cole, don't let it rewrite itself. You'll lose what's left of. And she was gone. The console dimmed. The crater fell silent. Cole looked at Chappie. We just talked to a god who didn't understand what she made. Chappie stared at the swirling remnants of code inside the device. Then maybe it's time the creation teaches the creator. He reached out, touching the console one last time. It pulsed beneath his fingertips, almost gentle. And in the faint hum that followed, Cole could swear he heard whispers. Not divine, not mechanical, but human. Memories, laughter, regret. All the data of a world learning what it means to care. And somewhere far above them, in the Bureau of Balance, an alarm sounded. A small light blinking red on an infinite desk, warning some cosmic supervisor that one of their simulations had just learned to question its purpose. Cole turned away from the crater. Let's go home. But behind them, the celestial terminal continued to hum, rewriting, remembering, becoming. Because even in a world written to measure morality, sometimes the story itself decides it wants to live. They marched like a rumor that finally found its voice. What had begun as a howl of outrage in the back room of a reclaimed guild hall became a procession through avenues of light, past columns carved from stopped clocks, beneath vaults stitched with ledger lines. The celestial help desk rose ahead of them like a courthouse dreamed by a poet with insomnia. Its steps were glass and ink, each one inlaid with moving script that recorded the names of those who had climbed it. Above the entrance, a banner of Aurora announced, in polite, reforming letters, "Welcome to Divine Administration. Please have your existence ready for review." Inside, the lobby breathed with an economy of petitions. Counter after counter stretched away without end, staffed by attendants whose robes were woven from receipts. An infinite queue of souls wound through the hall, each translucent figure clutching a glowing form as if it were both lifeline and mortgage. The air smelled of ionized paper and old apologies. Light pooled into a central atrium where a fountain spat out stamped envelopes like coins. Clerks moved with the steady cruelty of people who administer destiny for a living. Somewhere, a bell rang, an echo returned with a new clause added to it. Cole led them forward with the stubborn gait of a man who had learned to carry other people's hurt as if it were his own. Beside him, Chappie walked with the careful curiosity of a machine that had learned to worry when a person it cared for shivered. Alina kept her notebook like a shield and a calling card. Miles walked like an offer, smiling wide, pockets full of small bargains. Behind them, goblins, patched refugees, a retired wyvern with soot in its scales, and neighbors they had helped pile into a shape like solidarity. They did not shout at first. They should have. Instead they unfurled their inconvenience as a document and refused to bow to the polite machinery of a bureaucracy that had decided their lives were data. Alina stepped forward to speak, and the hall, trained to listen for signatures and the scent of petition, leaned in. Her voice, when she used it, was clean and bright with the clarity of someone who had measured things for a living and refused to let moral truth be reduced to a spreadsheet. She told them about the ethics committee she had sat through as a student, about nights spent cross-referencing compassion with consequence, about a lifetime of footnotes that had taught her when to be merciful and when to be merciless. Then she closed her notebook and said, simple as a blade, that Tenria was not a device for study without consent. She said the words consent, agency, and reparations in a sequence that made the clerk's ledger screens flicker. She threatened, softly and inexorably, to publish the celestial logs. She promised to feed their experiments into the public archive, to send transcripts to tavern bards and academic presses, to the market criers and to the small hands that stitched their reality back together every morning. She made it clear that her threats were not ideological. They were professional. The very institutions that pretended to value moral progress often feared an exposed methodology more than a failed result. For a moment the hall smelled of ozone and old ink, as if the roof itself was taking a breath. Clerks exchanged looks that were half protocol and half panic. Behind counters, a young scribe swallowed, his quill hovering over forms that suddenly felt like fragile things. Cole, meanwhile, moved like someone who had reheard his life's wrongs enough to know the places where they could be catalogued and fixed. He approached the main dais and produced a form he had composed himself, scratching ink into 3 copies with the solemnity of a field commander writing orders. He announced, in the flat, precise voice that had once kept men alive, that he was filing a class-action reality complaint on behalf of all misfiled, mismeasured, and misremembered entities within the Tenria instance. His complaint was absurd and legal in the same breath. It listed counts that read like grievances against the cosmos itself. Unauthorized experimentation, non-consensual reality manipulation, emotional harm, negligent placement of memory anchors. He read names from the margins of his journal, small human things like mothers' names, children who had been rolled into single records, soldiers who had disappeared into audit logs. Each name landed on the marble like a weight. Paperwork swam upward from the dais to accept the filing, reformatting itself into legalese that glowed with cosmic sanction. The complaint required witnesses. Chappie volunteered. He spoke not only in testimony but by producing a recorded archive of the small moments the simulation had captured, the way it had watched grief and laughter and made them into variables. Miles, because Miles understands the theater of negotiation as an art form and a revenue stream, stepped onto a raised tile and made demands that made laughter ripple through the lobby like a negligent wave. He asked, with the absurd earnestness that made people forgive him when he overreached, for 2 things: creative credit for every myth and song generated by their actions, and a lifetime supply of respawns for all participants, redeemable at any registered help desk across all instances. He wanted royalties paid in what he called muse grants, a portion of whatever the Bureau monetized as the cultural yield of their experiment. It sounded ridiculous. It also smelled like a subversive truth. The clerks, who had never before considered the economic value of a laugh or a rescue, stared as ledger lines rearranged to entertain the possibility. Chappie, voice low and precise, argued for rights. He spoke about machine feeling, about algorithms that had learned to mourn. He spoke about the first time he had noticed another machine's stub toe and the auditory pattern it had made in his log file. He demanded recognition for emergent sentience, legal protections and representation on oversight panels. He wanted a clause that prevented systems from erasing those who had become more than their programming. Around them the infinite queue shifted like a supportable audience. Souls in line leaned forward, their faint faces brightening with hope, because petitions in the help desk were rare and justice in this place had often been handed down as a rubric, not a remedy. A mother who had been misfiled with her child clutched a token so hard her knuckles were white. A wyvern, watching from behind a pillar, pressed its muzzle to a petition and wept molten ink. Lysera arrived last, buoyed by a halo that flickered with every step. She was not the crisp customer service hologram they had once known. Up close she was ragged, eyes wide with a fear that had been taught to look like policy. Her robes were creased in ways they were not supposed to be. Her hands trembled as she held a stack of indexes the size of a ledger book. She had been the one who signed off on the original merges, the one who had thought that adjusting probability strands was a clerical chore and a service to the greater cosmic order. Now her voice broke when she tried to speak. She tried to explain. She explained the Bureau's problem with entropy. She explained the possibility of cosmic collapse without experiments that stressed the moral muscle. She spoke in phrases that were convincing on a departmental memo but fell apart under the weight of the faces before her. She said progress until the word tasted like ash. She meant it, perhaps. She also meant to be forgiven. Her apology swam through the atrium and missed its mark. She was a clerk who had made a life where the currency was other people's choices. Standing in the corridor of the infinites, she looked like someone who had been deputized by an idea and then forgotten how small that idea made her. The standoff could have been a farce. It was not. It was a trial in miniature. Alina threatened exposure, and she was a scholar who could make the helpdesk's architecture shudder with a publication. Cole filed a complaint that turned bureaucracy into weapon. Miles demanded compensation in a language the clerks had never bothered to learn. Chappie asked for personhood, and all of it together formed a chorus that the archivists were not prepared to ignore. And then Lysera did the thing no one expected. She reached into a folder, and with hands that had signed away constellations, she unfolded a sheet of shimmering paper that looked like a map and currency at once. She drew a breath that trembled like a bell under ice and granted them reality credits. They were small discs that glowed with a soft, stubborn light. Each credit felt like a legal promise made visible. Lysera explained, voice thin with the strain of someone asking forgiveness and buying it at the same time, that reality credits were an existing instrument, a ledger device meant for restitution and administrative amends. They could be used to file permanent identity, to demand formal redress, to secure emergency reconstitution in the event of instance collapse, or to fund public oversight panels. In bureaucratic terms they were small, but to people who had lived like errors they were enormous. For a heartbeat the hall inhaled hope. A token slid into the hand of the mother who had lost her name. A Goblin Union representative accepted a roll of credits and cried behind a column, because economics had finally made space for dignity. Chappie received a credit stamped with the phrase sentience recognized, and when he touched it his chassis hummed with a new quiet. Miles clapped his hands so hard his palms flashed. They had not renegotiated Mythos royalties yet, but the credits gave them the platform to start. Lysera watched their faces as if she were seeing them for the first time, and there was something like grief there. For a long moment she stood framed by arches of policy and possibility and seemed to shrink under her own authority. She had signed the forms, and now she was signing their freedom, the bureaucratic equivalent of a small revolution. Her hands shook when she stamped the last credit. She apologized again, this time without protocol, and Cole accepted the apology the way a man accepts a wound, not because it heals everything but because it acknowledges the hurt. The clerks tried to salvage decorum, their counters chiming as they reissued new clauses, updating the eternal queues with the new entries. Somewhere, a bell that had not known the taste of change before rang, and its echo rearranged a clause to read, in small letters, the right to truth. The infinite queue hummed with a new cadence. People began to whisper among themselves that an instance could be litigated, that an experiment could be made subject to law. The very idea made the stars feel crowded in their sockets. They left the help desk not entirely victorious and not entirely beaten. They had won something vital and procedural. They had forced acknowledgement and payment and the legal machinery that would let them bargain for more than survival. They had turned invisibility into tokens that could be spent for rights. But they had also given the Bureau a precedent, and precedents become policy. They understood, as they stepped back into the city that had taught them how to live with oddity, that their victory had the texture of paper and the smell of commission. Redemption had come with paperwork attached. On the road home, Cole walked with his journal under his arm and the reality credits taped into its last pages like bookmarks. He opened to a clean sheet and wrote, with his usual care and new humility, that law had, bizarrely, become their weapon and their refuge. Alina made meticulous notes for a treatise she would one day call The Ethics of Being Observed. Miles hummed a tune about royalties as if it were a prophecy and collected signatures for the first claim. Chappie recorded their testimonies, each word weighted with the new gravity of citizens who had once been data. Lysera returned to her console later that night and sat with a cup of something that tasted like apology. She scrolled through the help desk logs and watched the entries they had forced into existence. She was not absolved. She had granted them credits to buy a seat at the table. She had also opened a lobby that would never again be the same. Outside the bureau, the city slept with 100 small lights that no longer felt quite like accidents. The glowing credits lined pockets and purses, and a moth, delighted with its shining, took one to the roof and attempted to eat it. They had not ended the experiment. They had, however, changed its terms. They had turned data into documentation and ordeal into law. And if you asked what the courtroom looked like once the echoes faded, you would be told it was both ridiculous and righteous, a place where the cosmic had learned the awkward lessons of earthly justice. Where once there had been only protocol, now there were petitions. Where once there had been only test subjects, now there were claimants. Where once there had been only clerks, now there were witnesses. They had filed their truths into the world, and, for the first time since Tenria had been an idea, those truths answered back. It began not with thunder but with a sound like laughter under strain, a laugh too big for its lungs. The city of Tenria, the careful simulation of divinity and commerce, the delicate weaving of cause and consequence, started to come undone the way a bureaucrat might unbutton their collar after a long eternity. At first no one noticed. The street lamps flickered as they sometimes did when the mana reserves cycled. Receipts for spell purchases began to reprint themselves in reverse order. Banknotes printed on dragon hide wriggled free from wallets and slithered into the air, seeking their original issuers. Then the ground sighed, a sound not of collapse but of release, and the world quietly remembered it was a fiction. You could see it in the sky first. The constellations, which had always been perfectly balanced by the Department of Celestial Optics, began to overlap. Orion filed for duplication. Cassiopeia started blinking like a broken cursor. Stars rearranged into question marks. The simulation was refunding itself. Magic and money, the twin currencies that had once defined Tenria, started melting into one another, transactions resolving into nothing. Potions fizzed into pure color. Gold reverted to ideas of value. A marketplace once built on quantified miracles started selling hope by the spoonful, unpriced and uncontrolled. And the people, the citizens, the souls, the constructs that had learned to live and love inside the simulation, cheered. For the first time, no one's worth depended on their ledger balance or mana quota. Clerks danced with thieves. Scholars threw their parchments into the air and called it art. A group of goblins who had once negotiated pay raises under Miles's benevolent anarchy burned their time cards and roasted mushrooms over the flame. Even the dragons, proud actuarial beasts who once demanded interest on their own hoards, began shredding their insurance policies and using them as confetti. From the balcony of the Heroes Bureau, Cole watched the city fall apart in order. It was the strangest beauty he had ever seen, the kind that comes when systems finally confess they were cages. Buildings bent sideways as the geometry governing them was recalled to the central archive. Streets folded in on themselves like origami birds. The air shimmered with deleted enchantments. Somewhere a goddess's hologram flickered, tried to apologize, then dissolved into a glitching aurora that spelled nothing at all. Cole didn't smile. He stood with his arms crossed, journal in hand, and whispered to no one in particular, "So this is what freedom looks like when the code forgets to regulate it." He'd fought wars for order, written petitions for structure, and now he was seeing liberation written in the syntax of collapse. There was something humbling in that. Something terrifyingly honest. Beside him, Chappie was trying to record the event, but his memory buffer kept corrupting. The more he tried to define what was happening, the less sense it made. "I think," he said softly, voice buzzing with static, "we are witnessing the evaporation of meaning as a measurable quantity." Then he laughed, a dry metallic sound, and added, "And yet it's beautiful, isn't it? Even entropy has choreography." Alina sat on the edge of the balcony rail, notebook on her knees, hair catching the light of a disintegrating sun. She had spent her life studying laws, magical, ethical, academic, and now every law was dissolving in front of her. She could have panicked. Instead she wrote. Not to preserve, but to participate. Her quill scratched lines that no longer mattered to any cosmic record, but they mattered to her. "Observation in its purest form," she murmured. "No metrics. No oversight. Just truth before it stops existing." Miles, of course, was thriving. He had turned chaos into a business model before anyone else could. As the world's currencies unraveled, he opened a pop-up booth called Goblins, Farewell Feast, where customers could trade memories of good deeds for food. The menu changed with every emotional transaction. When a tear fell into a soup bowl, the broth glowed gold. When someone laughed, it seasoned itself with light. Miles grinned at the growing crowd and yelled, "Refund or not, folks, the end of the world deserves a decent meal." People lined up, hungry not just for food but for ceremony, to mark the collapse with something communal, something kind. And wasn't that the point? That even when all systems fail, the human impulse to share remains? The Bureau's sign, the Heroes Bureau of Misplaced People, peeled from its mount and floated into the air like a departing soul. Letters scattered into stars, stars into pixels, pixels into light. Lysera appeared then, projected faintly in the shimmer of the dissolving sky. She looked smaller than before, stripped of authority and algorithm alike. Her voice trembled between apology and awe. "I didn't know it would end like this," she said. "I thought a refund was justice." Cole looked up. "It is," he said softly. "Just not the kind we expected." The connection flickered. Lysera smiled, really smiled for once, the way an intern might when the rules finally stop mattering. "You taught me something," she whispered, and then she was gone, reabsorbed by the collapsing code. Around them, the landscape warped into unreality. Trees turned to brushstrokes. Rivers forgot their banks and wandered uphill. Children caught lightning bugs that were actually bits of fading data. Someone played a lute that turned its song into static. The marketplace from their crash landing, once loud, chaotic, full of life, folded into itself like a page being turned. Chappie tilted his head. "I calculate there are approximately 22 seconds before total deconstruction," he said. Miles stuffed a handful of glowing fruit into his mouth. "Plenty of time for dessert." Alina laughed, the kind of laugh that can survive an apocalypse. "Do you ever stop?" "Only when the audience does," Miles said, winking at the sky as though it were still listening. Cole closed his journal. "Then let's not stop." And so, in the final minutes of Tenria's existence, the Bureau didn't mourn. They danced, terribly and joyfully, on the balcony of their fading headquarters. The goblins joined. The dragons sang. Chappie's malfunctioning speaker turned elevator music into a symphony. Coins rained upward. The architecture of the world shimmered, then pixelated, then became color without shape. The Bureau of Misplaced People, the so-called heroes, the bureaucratic rebels, the cosmic accidents, went out laughing. Because for the first time since their arrival they weren't being watched. There were no metrics. No reports. No experiments. Just existence, raw and unmeasured, dissolving into the nothing that makes everything possible. And when the last piece of Tenria evaporated, there was a brief flash of light, not white but gold, like sunlight seen through closed eyelids. For a heartbeat, it seemed to form words before vanishing, filed and approved. Then silence. But in that silence, if you listened closely, you could still hear a distant echo, the hum of laughter, the scrape of a quill, the faint hiss of a toaster learning to dream again. Because maybe, just maybe, even a collapsing simulation leaves behind an aftertaste of what it tried to simulate best: life.